Okay, burritos in place. I'm ready for the ride. Hello everyone, how are you? This is yours truly, Diabetic Cycling, coming at you once again. Thank you for spending your time with me today. This episode is sponsored by my own damn wallet and brought to you by your engagement. So hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so I can come see you more often, and especially with these episodes that are lined up, and get involved in the comment section, ask any questions. I try to do my best answering any questions and get involved there myself as well. I never raced professionally. I never worked for a bike magazine companies doing any sort of a bike reviews. I'm just a regular, normal dude you're gonna run into out on the road on your weekend ride. I might have smoked you last week, but it's probably likely that you'll smoke my ass next week. Over the last couple decades, I've had the pleasure of owning and riding absolute shit out of all the bikes that I list right here. And so what I'm bringing you today would be my thoughts and opinions based on my experience when I compare this bike to aforementioned bikes that I've ridden in the past. So I'm not here trying to tell you that what I'm saying is correct or right. It's just merely my 2 cents, my opinion. So take it with grain of salt. Normally, this portion of the review is when I go over the company and a little bit of a background and all that, but come on, I mean, do I really need to go over who Trek is and who these people are? Let's just skip that altogether so that this video doesn't go over an hour of a runtime like I always normally do. Moving on. So the bike that I'm showing you today is actually the model year 2024. Their Gen 7. So I've been riding this bike for about a year, and since my acquisition, they then came out with the Gen 8, which is their current model. So this, just keep in mind, this is the previous generation of Madone. So up until year 2024, they had basically three main road bike models. They had the Domani, which is more or less endurance, sort of a focused geometry. It's a far less aggressive, all-day comfort type of a rig. Then they had their Imonda, which was the lightweight affair for your climbing duties. Then they had the Madone, which is the no apologies, just a pure race model that also carried their Aero moniker in its model. Now, as of this year, they still have Domani, but they now married Imonda and Madone together, where Madone is now, you know, it's their Aero, but also at the same time, lightweight type of a rig. So basically all around there, that does everything well. Of course, this model that I'm showing you today, Gen 7, is the one that came out debuting their new ISO flow, which has this gaping hole in the seat post junction, supposedly aiding with the whole aero turbulent aero management, as well as when I first saw it, I was actually wondering if it would aid in your compliance management, as there's that cutout from the seat post to the the seat tube to the seat mast, where the post and the mast would swing freely as so. So I was wondering about that. Anyhow, more on that later in this video. Now, Madone, of course, is the name that Trek has been carrying for decades now, and it first got popular because it's the model that certain Texan, Lance Armstrong, won his 7 tours on. Now, I will come clean here and share with you that I used to be a huge Lance fan back when he was winning everything out in France, basically from 99 to about 05 or so. And what was there not to like? I mean, the whole American Texan bravado, and I'll never be defeated attitude, and that well-oiled machine of the postal service, and all the American supporters that were riding for him, Hincapie, Danielson, Landis, Tyler Hamilton, and Jonathan Vaughters. I mean, so as an American, you watch that team and they're out there just kicking the living daylights out of these snooty Europeans. I was a big fan. And then there was the whole thing, like the look, the infamous look when he looked at Jan suffering and just propelling and launching an attack. Of course, later Lance said that wasn't really the intention of the look, but you know what I'm trying to say. And his handlebar got caught by some spectators' plastic bag, so he dusted himself. He got up, and then he still managed to win the stage. There was that one time where Ansei's Yoshiba Beloki just kind of slid on the sand, and Lance somehow managed to avoid that and got descended. I mean, that whole thing. So there was a lot to like about Lance back then. Now, of course, after the admission of doping and everything, I know the public's opinions are very different. Maybe I'll touch on my thoughts on Lance thing later on down the future. Anyhow, so this is the bike that Lance was on, Madone. And if I remember way back when, basically everybody and their mother was riding a Trek and riding a Trek Madone because everybody wanted to ride the same bike Lance was riding. And I recall, me personally, I avoided getting a Trek, avoided getting a Madone because I didn't want to look like one of them, one of the lambs where everybody's going and doing the same thing, and I wanted to sort of look different. So I remember back then I rode an LA, I rode TCR, and I rode a Lightspeed Ultimate, I think, or Tuscany, I forget. But of course, Lightspeed also back in '99 when Lance was winning his very first tour. His time trial bike was actually Lightspeed that was repainted and badged as a Trek, as Trek didn't have a time trial bike back then. Anyhow, so that's the brief history of Madone. This bike was acquired as a full complete bike, unlike most of the other bikes that I show on this channel, where I normally obtain the frame set and then build up the way I would like based on my measurement and my component preference, so on and so forth. Some of the exceptions to that actually were Ribble Ultra SLR and Canyon Aeroed CFR, which I will link right here of my review episodes for those bikes. But coincidentally, those are full aero bikes, just like the Madone that I'm showing you today. And more on those later in this episode. Only thing that's different from a stock build would be stem. I replaced the stem to be a little bit longer, and then I also ditched the stock tires and then went with the Pirelli P0 race TLRs that I normally run, as well as my NVSES tires. The carbon used on the frame, actually the same on the wheels, would be Trek's SL5 carbon. So it's their slightly lower grade carbon versus their higher end OCLV. Is it 800? I forget their whole naming convention. So anyhow, so it's a little bit heavier, and the wheels are from their sister brand Bontrager. It's the Aeolus Elite 50, so 50 mil depth, not too shallow, not too deep, just right middle of the road, shot with the Pirelli P0s like I mentioned earlier. The cockpit on the bike is again from Bontrager, and the handlebar especially is 37 centimeters at the hood and 40 centimeters wide in the drops. And this is awesome. I want to touch on this real quick. Is Trek is doing a real great job where they're sizing appropriately based on sizing the components appropriately based on the frame size. So they're not just slapping on a 42 centimeter handlebar across the range. Instead, they're giving you what they feel is appropriate based on the size. So size 47 and 50 in the frame, they come with the 37 centimeter handlebar. And as the frame size gets larger, they're also increasing the component sizes as well, which I dig a lot. Why not all the companies do this? I don't know. In terms of a powertrain, the bottom bracket, T47, nothing to bitch about there. My crankset that comes with out of the factory is the Shimano 105, 5034 with crank arm length of 170 mil, just suits me fine. All right, I might mess up some of the numbers here, but here's the deal. Normally, I prefer riding bikes that's about 380 to 383 mil in reach, about 510 to 520 in stack. So that translates to different companies size their bikes differently, but normally small, perhaps, or 51, 52-ish would get me in the ballpark. From there, I would adjust either through a stem or something else to kind of get me the right fit. This bike here, I was sort of in between two sizes, 50 and the 52. If I went 52, my reach would be right, but my stack would be a little bit too high. If I go 50, my stack would be correct, but my reach would be just ever so slightly short. So I opted to go with the proper stack number and then adjust the reach via changing the stem, which is why the stem was changed as soon as I acquired the bike. So right now, out of the factory, the size 50 comes with 378 mil in reach, and stack is about 520. So that seems just about right, despite the frame size being 50, which some people may say too small for my height, my build, whatever. I typically ride one size smaller anyways, because I'm all torso, shorter legs in my proportions. So with that said, what's odd is my Ventum NS1, which I'll link right here, which is my previous review episode. Ventum NS1 actually has the same reach number at 378 mil, which I didn't feel cramped. And then that thing had a lower stack in full centimeter lower in stack. So basically the geometry is just about the same. And I believe the wheelbase on this Madone size 50 is about 975, 973, somewhere around there. So it's taut, it's tight, and it's a snappy based on numbers only, but we'll talk more about that during the ride quality section of this episode. Rest of the componentry on the bike consists of Shimano 105 Di to 12 speed, which I'm a huge fan of. Coincidentally, two of my very favorite bikes right now in my possession, both Athos and this Madone, guess what? 105 Di2, as well as I mean, I have other bikes that's currently running on Ultegra and like Canyon Airrailed, which is running on Dura Ace. But 105, I'm telling you, don't sleep on 105. I mean, you're saving a ton of money. You're not losing any on performance. I mean, some people find reasons to bitch about it, like how, hey, it's just ever so slightly slower in shifting. If you're not a pro rider, you're not even gonna notice it. Appearance, they didn't make it, janky. Looks up basically the same. So with your eyes closed, you're never gonna know. 105 is awesome, and it makes this bike more affordable than equipped other way. In the end, it's the legs that win races, not what groove set you have on your bike. So in my last episode talking about the Ventum NS1, I questioned, have we not seen this bike before? As in, the bike looked very much like many other bikes by many other companies, where it may have lacked personality of its own, maybe. But Madone, you look at the profile, it's a Madone. It's unmistakable. No other bike looks like this. It definitely stands on its own in terms of its appearance. Despite my color deficient eyes, the ox blood paint scheme that's on this bike with the very white logo on the down tube, the bike looks stunning in person. I think Trek calls this color scheme crimson. So there are days I look at this bike and I go, that thing looks all right. Then there are days I look at the bike and go, ugh. So I don't know where I exactly stand. Now, I'm a big proponent that always says it doesn't matter how a bike looks like, so long as it rides well. That's the whole point. However, I also always say to my close friends and everybody else that comes to me with the bike questions, bike that you like the way it looks is a bike that you're gonna find yourself more often on outside riding. So make sure to get a bike that you like in terms of how it looks. I really love the way the pointy bit of the bottom of the fork looks. I especially love the smooth flowing lines from the top tube to the seat stays. And then the bottom bracket junction, it is so huge, the boulder-like in its appearance. If somebody would, without knowing any better, if somebody said they made it that big to put a motor in there for motor doping, I would have believed it. That's how large that bottom bracket junction is. So talking about this bike, we must touch on the ISO flow, the elephant in the room, when we talk about design and aesthetics. Whether it really manages the turbulence of the whole airflow and all that, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I suspected maybe that thing would aid in the way the seat tube is sort of a cut, allowing the seat mask to do this. I was assuming it would aid in compliance, like I speculated earlier. So more on that later in the ride quality section of this episode. So a bit of a departure for my bikes, and then perhaps because of the price point, is that the cockpit consists of a normal standard stem and a handlebar instead of a one-piece type of all-in-one deal. However, the cable management is still very stealth. The hydraulic brake case housings come bottom side of the stem, entering the head tube, looking very clean still nonetheless. Now, the 2025 model Gen 8 has a much more understated Trek logo on the down tube, whereas this Gen 7, make no apologies for it, it's a front and center. That Trek logo on the down tube is large, it's bold, and it is in your face. Some people love it, some people don't. I don't really care, but thought I would mention. And then the saddle that it comes with out of the factory, it looks to me like a poor man's Burke saddle. The Burke saddle, very expensive. This thing has that center channel just completely cut all the way, 155 mil width. So this bike was acquired to pit it against my Ribble Ultra SLR at the time of acquisition, because Ribble Ultra, if you know, is a full-on aero rig. Now, since I acquired the Madone, I also now have been riding on, like this morning, I rode my Canyon Aeroed CFR. So there will be a three-way battle royale episode that I'm gonna do, pitting these three against each other and see if there is a clear winner. Before we deep dive into the ride quality of Madone, I also want to state that the marginal gains that would be attained by like the elite pro riders by being on these like aero optimized bikes, that's going to be harder to realize for us mere mortals, just purely at the speeds that we ride on. These are optimized to perform at, 35 mile per an hour, 40 mile per an hour from gun to the finish line. So without being able to retain that sort of a speed, the marginal gain that we would get from these would be pretty minimal for just weekend warriors alike. Now, that is not to say you wouldn't notice the difference, just pure speed on flats when you are on an aero bike as such, despite not having a pro level speed. The bike would definitely it will hustle more than compared to, let's say, Cannondale Synapse, which is a more endurance-focused bike. It would also handle itself much faster on a flat terrain compared to something like a Cervelo R5, just a feathery light rig. So there are some advantages that you may notice, but it's just not going to be that drastic. So don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, if I get myself on the aero bike, I'm just going to be so much faster. That's just not. However, up to a certain speed, there is definitely a gain by being on an aero bike. It's just not going to be night and day different, so don't get it twisted. This bike's bottom half does not know what noodle is, because it is as stiff as what I was packing back in my puberty years in my pants, and that thing was really stiff. All kidding aside, the stiffness is so plenty. I mean, I wish I could explain better, but basically every pedal stroke that you could put out is not wasted. If you're out of the saddle dancing, climbing up a hill, I mean, the bike hustles, and it hustles to get you up there in a hurry. And then obviously on flat terrain, descending on old Topanga Canyon Road, like here in the Los Angeles area, I mean, there is no bike this bike is going to be second to none in terms of its ability to just cut through the air and get you to where you are pointing your front wheel at. That said, based on the price point, the wheel set that this bike is equipped with, the Aeolus Elite 50, again 50 mil, middle of the road, should be great for all situations and scenarios, but the wheels are a little bit slow to spin up out of the gun from a red light. Let's just say once you are up to 18 miles per an hour or faster, you are going to be just moving just fine, but to get them to that point, they are a little bit sluggish, and that's something I should mention now. So in order to descend, obviously you must climb a mountain first, and this bike comes in slightly north of 18 pounds. So depending on your standards, that might be just fine, that might be slightly heavy or whatever. You do notice the weight a little bit if you're climbing something 14% gradient. But I mean, it is so deceptively not as heavy when you're actually riding it, and partially I believe it has something to do with how stiff it is, because bike just keeps moving as you're pedaling. But I never really feel like I'm dragging something heavy along again, unless the gradient becomes significantly steep. I mean, is this going to be the bike that I could go as fast as like on my Athos on 25-mile climb like GMR or whatever else? Probably not. However, on any normal situations, I really don't think the bike suffers from its weight, but weight is definitely noticeable. But you are going to notice that your effort is a little bit laborious when the gradient gets steep. The handlebar, typically, I lately prefer anything from 36 centimeters to 38 centimeters wide. This thing splits that difference right down the middle, coming in at 37 centimeters. Just fine, works really well for me and my build. The drops are 40 centimeters. Typically, I don't really care for the flare on road handlebars, but this thing is done really well. And actually, I see there's another Trek Bontrager handlebar that I'm running on one of my gravel bikes, and I really love that handlebar too. So 2 for 2, not bad. Speaking of the drops, super compact, so much fun to just yank at them as you're just spring to the the stop sign. Betting against your mate, your friend that you're riding against, to see the loser buys a burrito. More on that. And speaking of the burrito, that is the ISO Flow. Again, we're coming back to this topic. I cannot tell you whether it's really providing any sort of aero benefits. The compliance is definitely there, because like I said earlier, the bottom half of this bike is incredibly stiff, but the top half is doing such a great job on long days on the saddle. The bike, despite aero, I mean, gone are the yesteryears, aero bikes just beating you up all day. That is not what I'm finding on this bike. It just goes to show you how the companies have dialed it in right now, building these things. So the seat post, seat mast, where the ISOFlow starts, it definitely, I feel like, does a job of swinging back and forth, side to side, where it's eliminating a lot of the agitations that you may feel under your ass. So all good on that front until I share with you this bit. So if you look at Trek's website, they're gonna say the weight limit on this bike for a rider is 275 pounds. I have a bodybuilder buddy who's nowhere near 275. He had a stint on his very own Trek Madone Gen 7, the same generation, but his was a higher trim model, so either had Ultegra or Dura Ace with a better carbon than the model that I'm showing you. He had a situation where I don't know what he was doing on the bike. He was riding his bike. He wasn't doing anything weird or odd or questionable, but the seat mast broke off where the ISOFlow junction is. So despite that, I never had any issues. I mean, soaking wet, my fighting weight would be 158 pounds, 155 pounds. So, I'm not heavy enough to create any sort of a real damage. But those of you that are possibly heavier, I want to use the word carefully, you might definitely need to consider potential issue with that seat mast. I don't know if the Gen 8 is any different, but thought that I would mention that here. And then handling wise, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but I mean, it is razor sharp. The wheelbase is what, 973 mil. This thing, like I said earlier, it's very tight. It's very predictable in its handling. It holds the line well when you are knees down and just, carving that corner as you're descending and such. Confidence inspiring. Again, I don't want to sound cliche, but aboard this bike, I mean, the handling is not a problem. 160 mil rotors front and back out of the factory allow you to stop on a dime. 105 Dura-Ace doesn't matter. The Shimano brakes modulation is great and stopping power also great. So handling wise, really nothing to complain here. It may sound like I'm overly positive and optimistic about this bike, and that's because I really was and still am pleasantly surprised how well this bike rides. It's incredibly fun and occasionally even makes me think that I'm going a lot faster than I really am. There isn't really for me to pick this thing apart as negatives and cons, but I should again point out that the possible breach, stress fracture, or any sort of situation with that whole seat mast not directly having a connection to the seat post may become a problem for those of you slightly on the heavier side of things. And then some may also bitch saying north of 18 pounds may be too heavy as a bike, but let's face it, it's an aero bike. There's a lot of carbon on here. And also at its price point, it's their entry-level aero bike at that price point. Not to say that's cheap by any means. It's still a lot of money, but you know what I'm trying to say. So at that price point, that's about reasonable in my opinion, but you may find the bike as tad heavier than you would like north of 18 pounds. Let's start which one would I rather section. And first up is Factor Ostrovam versus Madone that I showed you today. Factor Ostrovam, slightly overpriced if you ask me. It's an all-arounder, whereas Madone is 100% aero rig, committed to just being aero. I would take the Madone without hesitating here. Against a Cervelo Soloist. Now, it's not that Madone is an inferior bike, but it's that Cervelo Soloist is just so remarkably performing bike at its price point. It's just really, really hard to beat. The Soloist does not suffer on flat, despite not carrying the whole aero name to it. So here, I would have to go with the Cervelo Soloist. Against the Rebel Ultra, again, you would have to stay tuned and subscribe to watch my three-way battle royale. And I'll tell you which one I would pick in that episode. Against Specialized Tarmac SL8 of mine. So caveat on this would be, if my Madone was spec'd at the same level of wheels, componentry, and everything, I would probably take the Madone. Now, SL8 is a remarkable bike, but the ride experience is very clinical. I want to feel alive when I'm riding a bike, and I just don't get that on SL8. Madone, much more fun bike. Now, however, if I must choose right now just as they are, then I would take the SL8 over Madone. Against Cannondale Super 6 Evo Hi-Mod. Despite my negative review of that particular bike, how disappointing it was, that bike is quick as hell out of the gun. It propels so fast from being dead stop to get up to certain speed. It is a very, very quick bike, but based on everything else, what a bike should ride like and such, no questions asked, I would have to take the Madone. Against the Canyon Ultimate. Now, slightly different intentions behind those two bikes. but I would probably end up taking the Ultimate over Madone here because it is just a little bit more well-rounded than Madone. Although that decision may be slightly more difficult if a Madone was spec'd a little bit lighter perhaps, I don't know. Oh wow, Specialized Athos versus Madone SL5 Gen 7. So isn't it coincidental and somewhat odd that my current two favorite bikes, the Madone and the Athos, both are running 105 Di2. You've seen them before, all the bikes that I'm even mentioning right now, a lot of them are Ultegra 12-speed Di2, and I got Dura-Ace on my Canyon. So that goes to show you the embodiment of how 105. Didn't some pro just win a race on 105 too? So there you go. There's another reason why you should never sleep on 105. But anyhow, Athos, despite being lightweight and makes you think it's a climbing specific bike, that thing is so well rounded, and I find that to be such a fun bike, such a great bike to be on. I would probably end up having to take the Athos over Madone, not because Madone sucks, but because Athos is just such an awesome bike, and they're about actually sold at the same price if I'm not mistaken. If I were to have the Athos and if I need the aero gains, then I'll probably slap on something with a little bit deeper section wheels and I would get the same thing. Whereas I can't make my 18-pound Madone to come in at 15 pounds. So there you go. And then the next bike that I would normally pit against would be Canyon Aeroad. And again, you would have to tune in to watch my three-way battle royale. And at that point, I'll tell you which out of the three aero bikes of mine is my very favorite. Against Envy Melee, how would my Madone fare? I would probably have to take the Melee here because that thing just handles everything a rider can throw at it with such composure. Despite how much I love my Trek Madone, Melee will take it. And of course, I'm aware that Melee is better spec'd than my Madone, but even then, it would still be an easier pick. And then to round out this portion of the review, against Ventum NS1 of mine, Ventum NS1 is a reasonably good bike. I just don't know if I like it more than my Trek Madone, so Madone takes it. So this was my very first Trek over the last couple of decades. I really didn't know what to expect. Despite the fact that I always share with folks all the time that 97 of the modern bikes are about the same because the manufacturing quality has increased so much, and only about 3% bike to bike would be the difference that separates each bike from another bike. Does Madone have 3% difference compared to some of the other bikes? I guess I would answer that yes, even just on the burrito mount alone. And then the name Trek also carries a certain connotation. Some of you may love that brand. Some of you may not care for it so much. I don't know about spending $15,000 on the top level Madone. However, at the price point this SL6 comes in at, this is a lot of bike, a lot of fun to be had. The price, again, it's not the cheapest thing that's out there, still overpriced, if you really look at it a certain way, because the whole bike industry is very overpriced right now, only to be worse. If you look at it, this thing sold below 5K, and a lot of companies right now are giving you 105 Di2 equipped bikes at over 6,000. So from a American manufacturer, despite it's built overseas, I find it to be a great value. And then the price is just set aside. Just as a kid on a bike, learning how to ride for the first time, you remember that feeling, right? I mean, this bike gives you that. The wind in the hair, just smile on your face. There's so much fun out being on this bike with your friends. What more can I want? In the end, a fun bike with possibly, potentially some additional speed to be obtained. What more could you want? A burrito? I've been Diabetic Cycling. You've been awesome. Keep the rubber side down. Be safe out on the road. Until next time, I'm out.